webinar where we're looking at COVID-19 in the context of auditing. We ran a webinar early in the week where we looked at financial reporting and where we looked at post-balance sheet events, the recommended treatment from an accounting perspective. We looked at impairments, we looked at the director's report, we looked at going concern. And today we're taking a slightly different view, but auditing, signing off audit reports and audit considerations is obviously significant for accountants and auditors at the moment. There's multiple practical problems here, but one of the questions that we're getting asked is, firms who rely heavily on audit and audit income, how they're managing the process right now. So I'm joined today by Colm from our technical team. And for those of you who don't know Colm, Colm joined the OmniPro team last year, and he has worked in small and medium-sized firms. But Colm has some unique experience here in that he worked as a quality control reviewer with the Chartered Accountants Ireland Institute for 6 years. So Colm has a deep understanding of auditing from a technical and theoretical perspective, but more importantly, he has the practical insights. He is the guy who was out reviewing files before he crossed over. So it's about identifying the practicalities and linking them into the auditing standards where we are right now. Colm, you have a number of topics that we're going to cover today. I'm just going to share my screen here and move to our slides. Colm, what are the specific topics that you're going to cover in this session?
Well, Des, yeah, I think you said it all. Like in terms of, we're going to try and cover off. There's quite a bit here, but we'll try and cover off as much as we can. Like, these are the kind of topics that are kind of coming up from a point of view of these are going to be the real issues that are kind of will come up in terms of audits from now on, probably till, as you said, probably maybe 12, 18 months time. So we're going to try and we're going to discuss, signing off the audit opinions. Now we discussed this at length on last week's webinar, but I think it's this really kind of puts everything in perspective in terms of, we're now at a stage where we're in the middle of COVID-19. This is fundamental to where we are. Should firms be, holding back on signing off the audit opinions? And this kind of underpins everything in terms of, all the other items all kind of spin out or spin up to this, really, to be honest. The next point is obviously more a practical thing, on-site audits versus remote audits. The issues regarding that, that kind of dovetails down into like obtaining appropriate audit evidence, irrespective of where we are and the issues that we're facing. This will always be the point. There'll be no leeway given in terms of obtaining appropriate audit evidence in the current climate. Well, how do you go about doing that? And then in terms of, the alternative procedures are there. And then what do you need to bear in mind regarding that? Because some of the alternative procedures mightn't give you the most robust evidence, but give you some kind of evidence.
Okay, so Colm, just before you go any further, I missed something in my introduction. So there's a question in there from Barbara. How do you get the notes for these webinars? Well, Barbara, you're live with us here on Zoom. You're actually one of the 500 odd accountants who's live with us on Zoom. So Barbara, if you go down to the bottom of the screen, down into your chat box, you will be able to download the slides and the handouts. Now we have, I think, 4 different handouts for today's session. We're looking at post-balance sheet events, and we're looking at audit opinion signing. What other handouts have you created, Colm?
Yeah, I've basically got, what I did was I went through all the individual ISAs, well, as much as I could, and I've highlighted there's an audit issues checklist there, and really that one highlights at a kind of a higher level what the issues are in terms of each ISA. So it starts off with 300, it goes down 315, and it just gives an idea of what are the matters to be considered if you're doing an audit. It just gives an idea of people where firms can focus on. Now I know we'll probably be doing this in a lot more detail as part of our on a workshop. But again, this just gives an idea of kind of, you know, the immediate considerations. What do you need to bear in mind if you're starting an audit, if you're in the middle of an audit, or you know you're about to finalize. I've as you said, I've a subsequent events checklist there. A couple of points on that we'll go through. I have a going concern checklist there as well. So really, I've taken the going concern, I've taken the going concern, gone through it in terms of, okay, well, what are the issues? You know, what it's yes, no answers in terms of COVID-19. There's a very simple kind of going concern decision tree, and then an example of a material uncertainty audit report there with, you know, with the material uncertainty paragraph. So there's a fair bit of handouts there to kind of go through.
Okay, so there's some questions here just in relation to the handouts. So those of you who are watching us either on YouTube, Facebook, or on LinkedIn, Jonathan and Michal are going to post some links up where you'll be able to access. Now, we already have some people are saying they're having some difficulties accessing. Folks, Internet Explorer, and this is a significant issue we're encountering with accountants in the last few weeks. Internet Explorer is no longer supported. So anybody who's trying to access through Internet Explorer, most sites will block from an Internet Explorer perspective. I see somebody has a question that column is accessing from an unusual camera shot. Well, columns IT went down and his internet went down just before the session. So yes, column is on the phone. There's a couple of you there are saying that you're having difficulties with volume and picture. Well, we've done a few tests beforehand, so we have people dialing in remote. So if you're possibly having sound quality or video quality issues, it's possibly your internet speeds may be an issue, because we have it, and we have confirmations there, video and sound perfect. And now I think there's a revised version of the links put up in the chat box. So I think everybody has those. Okay, Colin, you've set out our slide here in terms of what are the issues and what are we going to look at.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, so like there's quite a bit there. Hopefully we'll get through a lot of it. But look, you know, let's kind of kick off. So in terms of the audit opinions, I know, Des, you've done a lot of stuff on this in terms over the last week, in terms of you know, whether or not firms should be signing off audit reports, especially in terms of the uncertainty that we have at the moment. You know, I think it's vital that basically, you know, to recognize that, you know, when we're, you know, if you are signing off, do you have sufficient appropriate audit evidence? And I think, you know, whether or not there's an aspect to actually delay signing off until there's a lot more certainty, or whether or not we can get more certainty.
Yeah, and you see, Colin, like, let's talk about the practical issue before we start. So let's say a firm is right now. So our very first guidance, once the coronavirus started really breaking and the seriousness of the situation, you have to go back to like the middle of March, 3-4 weeks ago. And our very first webinar, when I spoke about it, it was about accountants making sure that by all means, help and support your clients, but accountants needed to get crystal clear on who's going to thrive throughout this, who's going to struggle but thrive at the end of this, who's going to sustain and survive, and then who are the people that are going to fail. So accountants who have done that work and have gone and looked at, okay, well, you know, here's the clients, and people who have audits that were nearly finished. Part of the problem that we're hearing is, but I need to sign off the audit report so I can raise the bill. Okay, before Colin gets into any of the technicalities here, what I'm suggesting is that we need to go down the route of interim billing and progress billing up to this point in time. But it's not just you as an auditor that's exposed. Directors who are rushing the sign off of financial statements right now, in absence of having a clear picture. And irrespective of whether the audit work was done in January, February, or March, or whether the audit work has started since all this started, directors should not be approving financial statements unless they have, from their own business perspective, clarity. Now, we well know there are certain clients at the moment that are absolutely flying, and the coronavirus is not going to negatively impact on them. It's actually going to positively impact. But I understand the billing problem. I understand the completion problem, but I'm suggesting, and Colin's going to talk about the technicality to sign off audit opinions, that if it is something that is driven, because we've had a lot of questions about this, you know, particularly for the firms who specialize in audit and who are significant auditors, if your cash flows, you know, require us to raise a bill and get paid, we just look at the possibility of interim billing before we even get into the detail here. And the key standards column are 700 and 560.
Yeah, very much so. And in terms of that, you know, they're quite explicit in terms of, you don't sign off, you don't date it until you're happy that you've sufficient appropriate audit evidence. So and like that's it, and that's clear there. In terms of the uncertainties, you know, you need to be you know, happy that you have that. And then if you are going to delay the signing off, well then you're now going into basically ISA 560, which is, you know, subsequent events. So you've got a period now between the director signing the financials and you're going to sign your audit report. So that all kind of dovetails into the additional work that you're going to have to do in order to, again, you know, satisfy yourself that you have obtained sufficient appropriate audit evidence. A couple of key points that you would have raised, Des, going on would have been, you know, communicating with management. If you feel under the circumstances you need additional time, well, you need to communicate that with management. Request the additional time to allow you to finish off the audit. And if they're pressuring you to sign, again, it goes back to, does that put a limitation of scope on you?
Okay, so in terms of there's a question in here, it's difficult to forecast as there are matters outside our control. Why should the directors delay signing? Well, Kieran, who asked that question, obviously there are some companies who are not affected. But if a company is significantly affected, and if there are assumptions underpinning the truth and fairness of the financial statements, the directors do need to satisfy themselves. I appreciate, Kieran, there's lots of things out of control, but right now at this stage, we're partially taking our lead, not necessarily from the FRC, Financial Reporting Council, or in an Irish context, IASA. And we're taking our lead from what we're hearing is happening in the Big Four, which, you know, if coronavirus is having significant impacts, our understanding is that the Big Four are delaying the sign-off. So moving on, Colin, you need to, I've never driven somebody's slides remotely, so you need to tell me when to move on the slide whenever you want. On-site audits versus remote audits. Obviously, there's practical problems, and the FRC have produced guidance, Colin, around stock takes and some of those issues.
Yeah, and like, you know, I put this slide in terms of, because, you know, this is an actual practical problem more so than anything else. You know, we've got restrictions on travel, access to client premises, access to their staff. So firms need to be aware of, you know, they need to do an assessment of what work can be carried out remotely. The important thing on this basically is that their assessment needs to flag areas where they need to go back, you know, when all these restrictions are lifted and when we have access to go back and actually, do we need to physically go back and actually be physically present at that stage and then vouch whatever, you know, issues may need to be boxed off. But it's a genuine issue because of the restrictions, the access to clients' premises, and especially availability of audit staff. You know, so if you don't have your staff, if they're obviously we're all on lockdown, if they're self-isolating, they could be working. But again, you know, availability of staff to do the actual work. Again, the bottom point, it comes back to your point. Does this have implications on the audit opinion? Do we need to delay the sign off? Do we need to delay the audit work?
Colin, Howard has a question here in relation to remote working. Scans of signed accounts, letters of rep, etc. suffice, or is it mission critical that we get original signatures on accounts first, and are there workarounds? Like, in terms of signing documents, I presume there's an element here, Colin, that sight of the signed document submitted by post subsequently would suffice. But like the postal system is not affected here, so I'm not sure, Howard. Like I would see it. Yeah, so maybe we need something signed today. So if the directors have the meeting approving the financial statements, they send us a signed copy, but they should be able to turn everything around and put it in the post. I am not sure whether we can justify not having original documents as a justification for critical things like letters of representation, critical things like signed financial statements. What's your take on that, Colin, and do we have any specific guidance on it?
Well, there's no specific guidance, but I would agree with you on that. Now, you know, in terms of a lot of firms now are moving to kind of a paperless audit, and they're using the likes of DocuSign and things like that. So it's these alternative procedures that firms need to be aware of. That as you said, is this a good time to rethink the whole audit process internally in your office? Are you able to scan the documents, get the manually signed, like DocuSign? Like the only experience I have would be, say, signing a rental agreement where I actually just write my signature in a little box, and that's taken as being a perfect signature.
Okay, so the on-site versus remote audits, what work can be carried out, and what do we need to go back to? And Colin, the one thing for me, I've literally been asked hundreds of questions in the last 2 weeks around this. And I know there's a lot of resistance out there, and there is concern. But ISA 200, let's go to the Foundation Auditing Standard. And the Foundation Auditing Standard sets the objective of the audit is for the auditor to form an opinion that the financial statements have been prepared in accordance with the applicable financial reporting framework, that those financial statements give a true and fair view. The auditor expresses an opinion on those financial statements, but to express the opinion, the auditor has to have sufficient appropriate audit evidence.
Yeah, and my next three kind of three slides try to cover off that. And actually coming from my previous role, I'd be looking at this saying, look, guys, irrespective of what's going out there, if you're signing off an audit report, you have to be happy that you've got sufficient appropriate audit evidence to support your audit report. And like that's still the benchmark, and that's still what you're going to be, unfortunately, going to be pitched against if you're subject to a monitoring visit. And while monitoring maybe has taken a bit of a back seat now because we're all going through other issues, it's still there, and the files will still be looked at.
Well, Colin, for some firms who have a small number of audits and mostly audit exempt and non-audit work, that works okay. But like, I'm looking at some of the attendees we have on today, and I know that their firms are heavily driven and have entire departments focused on audits. And there's a general question here, Colin, in from Liz. Is there specific guidance on new data protection agreements being signed by audit clients which acknowledge the data has been held in staff homes as they work remotely? Now, again, we have spoken to GDPR experts on this, and remote working does give rise to new and additional concerns in relation to audit. We are hearing some firms who are getting specific letters signed to clarify, but you as a firm need to look at your basic data protection policies. You have to assess how people can work from home and maintain data protection. I'll be honest with you, Liz, it's not necessarily something we're going to cover in huge detail today, but one of my concerns is that there's a whole load of people, and it's not just about audits, there's a whole load of people are now remote working. I think every firm needs to have a very clear policy, procedure, and tracker on documentation being taken, client documentation being taken out of the office and being returned to the office. Because I have massive concerns already that when this is all over, that because we're used to client files going into specific places in specific ways and offices running where they've got either electronic or manual filing systems, the documentation is going to be lost. So you're right to consider the issue. It's not really an audit issue. It is a GDPR issue. And it is absolutely a GDPR issue. There's a question in here from Lucilla through Facebook. So this one, Lucilla, December accounts need to be lodged with regulators by the 30th of April for travel agents. And you know, like I do know that, for example, in an Irish context column, the central bank has acknowledged that they're not going to meet the deadlines. Lucilla, our understanding is every external regulator who has deadlines like this, get your client to contact the regulator and confirm what their new deadlines are. Because our understanding at this stage is every regulator who had hard deadlines, like 6 months after the year end, like 30th of April, you know, the charity sector, those hard deadlines are all now pushed back. Would you agree with that, Colin?
100%. Yeah, and like, you know, it was one question that came in actually after last week's session in terms of, well, how are the central bank dealing with it? And I got onto them, and they're basically saying, look, it's a case by case basis. So if auditors feel that they mightn't be able to comply with their statutory duty reporting duties, they need to get onto the central bank as soon as possible and basically and flag it. And they're saying, well, then look, we'll note it on the file, and you just get them in as soon as possible. But again, that needs to be documented, and that's vitally important because, you know, in 6 months, a year's time, hopefully this will be a distant memory. But when someone comes in to look at your file, you kind of go, well, look, these are accounts. If it's a central bank regulated entity, these weren't signed off within 6 months of the year end. What did you do? Did you contact? Did you do what you should be doing, like contacting the central bank and letting them know? So this all needs to be documented on file. And as you said, each regulator has their own different way of dealing with it. So if you are in it, get onto the regulator and basically see what their assessment is. Coming back to the audit evidence issue and the alternative procedures, the important thing basically is if you've highlighted alternative audit procedures that you're going to carry out because of where you are at the moment, you need to assess both the sufficiency and appropriateness of what the evidence is going to be produced. Because it mightn't be as robust or as good as the evidence that you would get in inverted commas a normal situation. And again, the basis for that assessment needs to be clearly documented on file. And then the next point basically is your assessment needs to recognise that maybe the quality and the reliability of that evidence that you're going to get might be lower, and that's how you're going to bridge the gap.
Okay. So the year-end Stocktakes obtaining independent confirmations. Like I have Abdul here has asked the question: directors have refused to sign bank letters, to send signed bank letters by post. Like that's like if the letters can be sent, I just think non-cooperation with clients.
Yeah.
And when there is methodologies of getting the information, getting the evidence, and that obviously, you know, that's effectively imposing a limitation in scope.
It would do.
Like we don't know where the institutes are going yet, Colin. I know that you have that obviously you've recently left, and I'm sure you have close links and connections. But I can't see any derogation here, Colin, that the need to get bank confirmations letters, solicitors letters.
No,
I can't see at any point in the future those fundamentals of an audit file being considered not necessary.
No, and this is exactly it. Like, no, I don't see it either. Like, it still comes back to the fundamentals as well what you have said. The responsibility, irrespective, is to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence, and you need to basically, in terms of bank confirmation letters, like, if they're unwilling to send one out, you need to consider how that impacts on your audit. Are there alternative audit procedures you can carry out? Bank confirmation letters wouldn't be a massive problem, but the problem would be, is what you said, if they're unwilling to sign these documents. Well, that's a whole different matter completely.
And just one underpinning thing here. Okay, so one underpinning consideration here is you have to assess whether the impact of the coronavirus crisis is material. Like anything we're doing here from an audit perspective, what disclosures could it materially impact? And that's your starting point here in relation to Stocktake's column. You're asking the question, okay, well, first of all, is Stocktake material? And then if Stocktake is material, so ISA 501 does give specific guidance where attendance is impracticable.
It does, and I think I think probably the Stocktake seemed to be one that everyone kind of jumped on the bandwagon, because I think the panic over, as you said, like the panic over COVID-19 was palpable. They were dealing with so many issues, and Stocktake seemed to be one of those, these issues. Oh my God, we can't deal with it. But in fairness to the ISIS, 501 is fairly clear on it. And the guidance was always there in terms of carrying out alternative procedures over it. So in terms of whether or not you could do a virtual stocktakes or rollback procedures, we're going back to our basics almost in terms of in terms of stock. Obviously there's some specific issues in terms of whether or not a stocktake is carried out, or is it carried out at a different period in the year end, in terms of if no stocktake was carried out, on my next slide there, was it because the premises was closed? Is there no movement in stock? So can we do the stocktake after the lockdown period? And can we do rollback procedures? So these are all the alternative procedures that are there that shouldn't cause firms too much problems. Obviously you got to bear in mind issues over the condition of stock. Is it damaged, out of date, stock theft? But these would all be considered as part of those procedures. And then obviously the final knock-on effect, if there's no stocktake carried out irrespective, well then you've got a limitation of scope. That was always there.
Yeah, so it's the same standard, slightly different application, and the guidance given doesn't change the approach.
It doesn't exactly. And then if you do have a stocktake carried out at the year end, okay, the question is over your ability to attend, and then the alternative audit procedures. There's big talk about a virtual stocktake. So I've heard stories of people walking around with laptops and video cameras, doing that. Now, again, you need to consider whether or not that's giving you appropriate audit evidence. Do you have to dovetail that with doing a stocktake? Like if they're doing a stocktake, to possibly able to do a stocktake after the lockdown period, again, we do rollback testing. Again, the same issues over the condition of stock, and then we're going back to do we have a limitation of stock, a limitation of scope if it isn't carried out. So the fundamentals are still actually there.
Yeah, and the other issue, obviously, with stock, with stocks is the valuation of stocks, which continues to be a fundamental issue.
Yeah, but I think and again, this goes on to the whole area of basic impairments. Whereas there'll be a few comments down later on about well, we've vouched the existence, we've got a balance sheet amount for stock. Well, then are we talking about impairment, and how are we actually auditing impairment? Are we recognizing that like the stock isn't at the value? But again, this I think Mike covered it very well in his financial reporting webinar, in terms of, this is a fundamental issue in terms of financial reporting, is the whole area of impairment.
I see a question. I see a question in there from Brenda in relation to accountants report, directors report in audit exempt companies. So Brenda, we did a webinar earlier in the week on financial reporting, which looked at some of the wording and the possible disclosures to go in. Now, we do have a more in-depth financial reporting conference coming up in the coming weeks. But if you just go into either the free Facebook group, where all the material, all the resources are all kept, or I do think that the guys have built out a specific website where all this stuff is kept. So if you're on our mailing list, and if you're on today's session, Brenda, you will have got access to both of those resources. Column, going concern, there's a point in here from Kieran: should all audit reports and directors reports not just address the going concern issue, as who can have confidence the economy will not be depressed by 30% or more, and this will affect cash flows and profits? But I do think, again, you've got to stratify your companies, because different companies are having very different circumstances right now. But absolutely, the director's report needs to address the issues. The notes to the financial statements need to address the issues. And I presume for companies who are affected, the auditor needs to consider putting in material uncertainty paragraphs under ISA 570, or they need to put in possibly stronger opinions if they have a lack of audit evidence. So it's kind of considered coming to the table here, Kieran, at the very outset, that this will be addressed in the director's report of every company. And the more serious the issue is, the more detail there will be, and it will be in the notes. And then obviously it's a question of, well, have we got sufficient appropriate audit evidence on which to base our opinion or not?
Very much so. And to try and help firms, one of the handouts basically is a going concern consideration. Now, it's quite literally just taking ISA 570, going down in terms of trying to phrase questions in terms of, are they prepared on the going concern basis? Really, try to highlight the impact of COVID-19 on it, or have firms, or have the companies factored all this, or their clients factored COVID-19 into their assessments. So it's okay,
folks. I'm just going to put up on screen here. Colm has created a subsequent events checklist. He has created a sign off on audit opinions checklist. He has created here a going concern checklist. So all these are in your handouts. And then he also has here the overall audit issues checklist. So Jonathan, there's a couple of questions in about where people can get downloads. Perhaps you'd post the downloads again, just so any latecomers can access them.
Yeah, and like, unfortunately, the going concern checklist is it's a fairly monster one, because the going concern ISA, there's a lot in it, and there's a massive expectation now. So firms need to be aware. There's a massive expectation of the extensive work that's going to be, even if COVID-19 didn't happen, the expectation is that there's a lot more extensive work going to be carried out on going concern, a lot more pushback on management estimates and judgments around going concern. It went away. Going concern went away because obviously we came out of the last bad times, and things were going well. So the whole going concern kind of moved away. But we've been seeing it come back. And now it's really coming to focus here. And I know from experience, 6 years in as a reviewer, it's going to be a massive area of focus on a monitoring visit. And so firms need to be aware of that. And in the going concern checklist, I put it at the one of the pages there. There's a very simple going concern decision tree. Obviously it doesn't get away from going to the full OmniPro opinion builder. It just gives a basic idea of have you sufficient appropriate audit evidence. If you haven't, and if you're unable to conclude, you're going down disclaimer of opinion possibly. If the going concern isn't appropriate, you're going maybe a qualified opinion, adverse opinion. Obviously, a step back on this, as you said, Des, are you actually, should the company be done on a breakup basis? We're take a step back from this in terms of, is the situation so serious that maybe, there's possibly no future for this particular company, so this should be done on a breakup basis.
Yep. So looking through, and just one thing that we are working on, folks, is from an audit program perspective, what you don't want to do is totally change your entire audit programs just for coronavirus, because this issue is going to pass. So what we're building at the moment is we're building a pack that will sit on an overlay. So for our Accountants Resource Center members, we're building a pack that will sit on an overlay that basically will be your specific coronavirus checklist. So we're working on that integrated pack, but I'm sure, as you will all appreciate, these things do take time. We're working around the clock. They do take time, but we're also operating in a vacuum of information, because really there's not too many people stepping up and saying this is what you need to do from an audit or from a financial reporting perspective right now.
And I think I'm going concern, one of the points there on my slides, comes back to the points you've been saying for a long time, Des. It's about, well, how can you have the reliability on cash flow projections and budgets? The uncertainty at the moment is there's so much uncertainty out there. How can someone stand over a set of cash flows or budgets that they're preparing? And that, again, that dovetails back to the point about, well, should we be delaying signing off the audit report because of this uncertainty?
Okay, so Colin, there's a couple of questions in about charities, not-for-profits that are extensively government funded. And so we have experienced a wide range of different responses for charities. So some charities basically are getting their funding drawn down without having gone through the whole financial statements process. And so from a charity perspective, from a not-for-profit perspective, you're looking at funding, but you're also looking at what practical impact is coronavirus going to have on the general operations. And we have a specific question in here from Dawn in relation to the childcare sector. So obviously the childcare sector, in an Irish context, for example, it kind of has its own aid package and its own support package. Dawn, if it were me personally, and I had a childcare audit to sign off today, until such time as the funding for that sector is teased out, and until such time as the whole aid package and how all that's going to work is teased out, I would say that, well, I personally would hold off. I wouldn't sign right now. I just wouldn't sign that type of an audit right now until there's more information.
Yeah, and I think that's a very valid point. And also, you've got to bear in mind, the whole COVID-19 is having an effect, on the country as a whole. So, we've got how many billions being put into healthcare, how many billions being put into social welfare. How's that going to have an effect on funding for the not-for-profits in the future? So, again, we need to kind of bear that in mind. So the whole area about going concern, it's going to be something else. It's going to be an area it's going to be there. We could spend a whole day probably on going concern, but we'll move on. In terms of, if you can share those slides again, that'd be great.
Oh, sorry, I've moved to the wrong screen. My apologies.
No worries.
Okay, so moving on then to events after balance sheet date column. So myself and Mike had an extensive session around adjusting and non-adjusting items. So adjusting and non-adjusting items.
And
so
I'm not gonna rehash that. And to be honest, because like, you know, you guys did an excellent job on that. Probably the
FRC guidance in general, and you have to look at specific circumstances, but the FRC guidance in general is that unless circumstances indicate otherwise, for 31st of December year ends, any issues that have arisen subsequently in terms of impairments or any of those issues, they are non-adjusting items. But then as you look at the February, March year ends, you have to consider, based on the geographic location, the impact on the group if it's a multinational group. But definitely as we come into February and March and the first cases existed, and as the pandemic was becoming obvious that it was going to land in Ireland and the UK, well, now you might have to go down the route of adjusting events.
Yeah.
So your 31st December year ends, the starting point is they're non-adjusting. January possibly non-adjusting, but our reckoning on this is as you come to February, March onward year ends, any adjustments that need to come about are going to be adjusting events and should be audited that way accordingly.
Yeah, and very much so. And I think that's it. And I think the ISA 560 is quite clear about, like, you know, from the date of approval of the accounts to signing the audit report, the work that has to be done. But I think we may have some people on the webinar today who are kind of saying, okay, well, look, I may have signed off an audit report, you know, maybe a bit too quickly, and maybe if I take it a step back and, you know, and facts become known after the audit report, after such data have been issued, you know, the ISA 560, you know, if facts had become known, if they had been known to the auditor at the day of the audit report, you know, that may have caused the audit report to amend, or the auditor to amend the audit report, there is a facility to go back and amend the accounts. So it's just, you know, it's just a kind of it's a ISA 570 paragraph 14. So I know there might be some concerns out there, whereas, you know, we signed off an audit report, things have kind of moved on. So, you know, even in a week's time, in a week's signing off, you know, there is scope there to go back and amend the flat statements, and therefore amend the audit report.
Okay, so there's a couple of questions in here that link to going concern, so we'll come back to them. So Paul has a question. If a company has large cash reserves and its trade has decreased by over 50%, and the company is able to trade on their cash for over 12 months, does that cover going concern? Well, Paul, if somebody has cash reserves and we do cash flow projections and we can work on reduced outputs, by all means. So if you can, and if it can be demonstrated, well, yeah, of course. Now, the fact that the company can trade as a going concern doesn't necessarily remove the requirement, I believe, for that to be considered and the principal risks and uncertainties to be considered in the director's report and in the notes to the financial statements. But obviously, a company like that that's one of the companies where, well, potentially now there's one example we could sign off an audit report. And Darren has a question in here. Are we back to the 2008 era where we're issuing opinions due to reliance on financial projections and value and use calculations? We believe that the full gambit of audit opinions is now going to be called into play. Everybody knows that under ISA 700, ISA 705, ISA 706, there really are two key opinions, and that is the unqualified, unmodified opinion most commonly, and then companies that have going concern issues, there might be a material uncertainty paragraph or an emphasis of matter. And I do believe that we are going back to a situation where with property impairments, going concern issues, all the multitude of issues we're talking about today, that we're going to see material uncertainties in relation to going concern and emphasis of matters in relation to limitation and scope coming back into play. But we're also going to see more serious opinions. We're going to see more serious opinions. And we're already having conversations with people where, you know, when we look at the scenario, that there is a lack of audit evidence. The directors are trying to push through. And our opinion in the circumstances is, well, actually, a material uncertainty here may not be enough because there's a limitation in scope of the audit. So it's, yes, Darren, you're right. The type of opinions that are going to come out of this and the opinion rhythm, there's going to be sort of a standard approach or methodology. But I do believe that we're going to be using everything from disclaimers of opinion due to multiple significant uncertainties, disclaimers of opinion due to limitation in scope. I think the full remit of the opinion forming standards is going to come to play.
Yeah, I would agree, John, that and that was going to be one of the next discussions. In terms of, because there's so much out there's so much uncertainty. All the eyes are impacted by COVID-19, all the issues over the actual physical audit issues that we are going to see. We are going to see, you know, some interestingly phrased audit reports. But again, when we start to see them, Des, I don't know, because obviously if people are starting to, you know, hold back on signing off audit reports, you know, it could be weeks or months down the line.
Derek has a question here, Colin. Is there a standard letter of representation and standard wording? So unless you've got to that today, Colin, it's on our workflow, Derek. It's on our workflow. The guys are literally working around the clock. We will get to. We wanted to come to. We've been asked so many questions in the last 2 weeks. We wanted to come out with a live. Here's where we are. But Derek, we have the letters of representation, the standard paragraphs. Like I say, we're specifically working on an audit file overlay, the sort of the COVID audit piece, which we're working towards having hopefully by the middle of next week. But it's this stuff has taken time.
Exactly. You're right. That probably the only comment, and I won't labor on this on the flash statement disclosures. You know, yourself and Mike did an excellent you know, webinar on disclosures. I'm looking at this purely from an audit point of view. So, and from an ex, you know, quality reviewer, ISA 330 will still apply irrespective of what's going on in the world. The emphasis will be on COVID-19 disclosures. You know, because in my previous role, the first thing I did on a visit was I reviewed the set of financial statements. I benchmarked them out there for, you know, what should be in there and for best practice, and that'll probably be the same. So what they'll be looking at basically is, okay, irrespective of when of what your year end or when you're signing off, there's going to need to be something in respect of COVID-19. And the ISA is very specific. You as the auditor need to perform sufficient audit procedures to evaluate whether the overall presentation of the flat statements, including disclosures, is in accordance with the applicable reporting framework. That's what you need to do. So in terms of, you know, your audit file and your preparation for a monthly visit, you need to have procedures in place to demonstrate how this has been done. So how are you going to do it? Are you you'll be hopefully using, you know, Mike's updated COVID-19 disclosure checklists and, you know, and the template paragraphs. But I know, Des, you had mentioned
we're working through, just so that you know what we're doing, we're working through FRS 102. So Mike did an overview webinar, and I think we've identified 15 to 16 elements of FRS 102 where there is a specific, tangible and direct impact. So again, we're working on building new disclosure checklists specifically for coronavirus. I just want to pick up on something here. If you disclaim based on a material uncertainty, so in an Irish context, are you suggesting as auditor that the company is recklessly trading, and do you also have to report? I didn't say that if you have to disclaim due to multiple significant uncertainties that the company is fraudulently or recklessly trading. Obviously, as the auditor, that is a consideration. Now, we have come across scenarios, where there have been disclaimers of opinion. So we've seen these both in UK entities coming from the Big Four and Irish entities where there was disclaimers of opinion. Just because there's a disclaimer of opinion due to multiple significant uncertainties does not necessarily automatically hit the requirement of, well, now they're fraudulently or recklessly trading, and in an Irish context, it could give rise to a reportable offence. A key thing here is you do need to absolutely assess fraudulent and reckless trading, and the directors need to assess fraudulent and reckless trading. But in a vacuum of information, based on all the new issues we have right now, it's a scenario that could possibly arise. And this is where we're saying there's people who have a lack of information right now, but as this progresses and as things become clearer, the answers may be found to those questions. And this is why we're leading with our concern of people signing off audit reports too hastily and not considering all the issues. Colm has referred to it, but we've had people come to us this week who have signed off audit reports in the last 2 weeks, and now they're kind of going, whoops, what have I done? So that's why we started with that point. And time is everything here.
It is, because as you said, like things are changing on an hourly, daily, weekly basis. So things might be more clearer. Probably the only comment really on the audit opinions, and you said it basically, is, you know, as you said, the whole gambit is going to come into play. You know, we're starting there with a breakup basis. Unfortunately, there's a lot of clients out there who probably won't make it beyond this. So are we signing up? Are we going to be having audit opinions on the breakup basis a lot more frequently? And then in terms of material uncertainty going concern, we've spoken about that, and then all the other opinions. Hopefully we'll obviously be referring back to the OmniPro opinion builder on the ARC, where hopefully we'll have a COVID-19 opinion builder to address the specific COVID-19 issues. But again, I think Des, you're right. Like, we're going to see a lot more different type of audit opinions, different ways of kind of phrasing them because of this.
Yeah, like our opinion builder, when I'm working through with people one-to-one, Colm, I can still work through the opinion builder and take COVID-19 into account.
Yeah.
But one of the things that Colm and Mike came up with last night, when we were having a conversation, one of the things the guys came up with last night was, well, okay, so we've got our standard opinion builder, but what about if we create a flowchart opinion builder that is specifically dealing with COVID-19 issues, because there's more nuances and more issues.
Yeah, exactly.
So just provisions and contingencies, estimates and judgments, impairments, fair values. So basically, Colm, all the issues that we talked about in the context of FRS 102 and financial reporting now loop back into play here, from an audit perspective.
100%, like, you know, as in it's all well and good getting the accounting treatment right and getting the stats right, but from an audit point of view, it kind of goes back to ISO 330, whereas, you know, sufficient audit appropriate evidence of the disclosures and of the accounting framework used. So in terms of, you know, these are some of the areas where there's going to be a lot more focus. Like if I was reviewing a file as a monitor or as a reviewer, and I knew COVID-19 was here, you'd be looking. These would be the areas you'd be looking at. You wouldn't bother going anywhere else, because you're covering off all your main issues about the difficulties that auditors are going to have. You know, we're coming back to impairment again. We haven't really had impairment, you know, in maybe 5, 6, 7 years. We're coming back to, you know, really on estimates and judgments. You're coming back to the pushback against management, and, you know, we've all been friendly with all our clients because things have been going well. You know, there's going to be a lot more. There's going to be an expectation that your file and your audit work has shown your pushback and your, you know, professional skepticism on the audit file.
Howard, thank you very much. Howard is going to get a gold star and go at the top of the class. Howard has spotted our phraseology, breakup basis, or non-going concern basis. The terminology has changed. Howard, you're absolutely right. In ISA 570, it's about adopting the going concern basis of preparation. So the wording has changed. So just there's another general question in here, Colm. And there's a general question: if you have a service company that has now been required to shut down under government instruction, its income is nil. Its costs are variable. Most of its costs are variable. There's not significant fixed costs. They have enough to get through, based on the government subsidy scheme, the steps they've taken. They have enough to get through, say, for 3 to 6 months. But obviously, say in an Irish context where Patrick is asking this question from, and the government subsidy scheme is only on a 12-week basis. And so we can rely on the government subsidy scheme for a 12-week basis. But a company like that, Colm, if it's really simple, really simple, income has gone to nil, they have enough cash, there's an example where you could possibly sign off an opinion. And that you would put in wording in the director's report, you put a note to the financial statements, you would specify the basis for the assumptions. So you would, in the note disclosure in relation to going concern, you would specify the basis for the assumptions. So Patrick, as you have laid out the question, any of you that feel compelled to sign off an audit report in the early stages, if it's like Patrick's scenario here, this company has every prospect of survival once, you know, this doesn't go on over a prolonged period of time, and once the government subsidy scheme is extended. So yeah, absolutely, we can put that, you know, that's one you could sign off on.
Yeah, and very much so. You know, the whole belt and braces approach in terms of, you know, disclosures, laying it all out, especially regarding going concern. Obviously, you're laying out the reasons for the material uncertainty, but you're also laying out, it's important, what management's plans are to address it going forward. So if they will come out of this, well then yeah, I would kind of agree with you there, Des.
Okay. So just moving on, specific matters of focus. Just some other matters here, Colm, that you've identified, based on the questions that people are asking.
Yeah, like some of these are kind of, you know, maybe, you know, not so important, but like some of them, you know, are coming up. So the whole idea of acceptance of new audit engagements, just, you know, to watch out. Like you do have restriction on travel. You've access to information. Books and records. So it might make it difficult to actually review the previous auditor's working papers. You know, so, you know, whether or not, like, you know, I'm not saying stop taking on new audit engagements, but you know, you need to bear in mind that you know, access, you know, what access you need to information. Can you get that access after lockdown, but before you sign off, to give you comfort that, you know, you are signing off the new engagements. And I know ISA 210, it does restrict taking on new engagements where you know there's going to be a limitation of scope. You know, so bear that in mind for COVID-19. So if you know you're going to take on a new engagement, you know you can't get the, you know, there's going to be issues over stock, or there's going to be issues over access to information.
And here's the thing, Colm. There's a big issue here, right? ISA 210, dealing with new letters of engagement, paragraph 7 says you should not accept the audit if you know that there's going to be a limitation of scope, and you should consider if there's going to be a limitation of scope that may result in a disclaimer of opinion. Now, that is different to the wording in ISA 705, which talks about imposed limitations of scope. So if the directors or management have imposed the limitation of scope, well, then the auditor needs to go in a certain direction. So potentially here, you could come across engagements where, despite the fact it mightn't be an imposed limitation of scope, which most people are aware of, there could actually just be a COVID-19 limitation of scope, which paragraph 7 doesn't differentiate.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, you know, it just firms need to bear this in mind. You know, if they are going to take on a new audit engagement, because, like, you know, a lot of these things, like this is all new to while the eyes are there and they're all straightforward, they probably weren't built for a COVID-19 situation. So, you know, we're all trying to kind of fit these into situations and kind of have workarounds. The next point, okay.
Mairead, I just have a question here. Can you send a link to download today's slides? Mairead, the Jonathan has put the links up to the slides and all the handouts. It's in the chat box. So where you typed in the chat box, it's in there in the chat box. Jonathan has put them up multiple times throughout the hour. Like Colm, I'm conscious of our time here, and we want to get people out. But like, I know very few people are really thinking massively about monitoring visits right now because there's more important issues, let's be honest. But at a point in time, and we're hearing whispers that the institutes may be putting in a quality control regime that involves them not going on site. Yeah. But at a point in time, people are going to have monitoring visits. This is going to go on, and COVID is going to impact audit opinions and financial statements at a minimum, even if we come out of lockdown. If we come out of lockdown by June, it's going to still impact on financial statements right up to June 2021. So then if you look at, well, monitoring visits, so this COVID is going to be a focus of monitoring visits probably up until June 2022. So guys, we know, I know some people think our business is different, but we serve people the very same way as you do. It just so happens that we're in a niche who all we serve as accountants. So we know and understand. We know what the last few weeks have been like because we're covering the ground at the same speed to try to get the stuff out to you guys. But we can't lose sight of quality control. We can't go back to Liz's question. We can't lose sight of GDPR. And like there's been no relaxation of GDPR rules just because of COVID-19. The practical issues, the supervision and review of audits. Folks, I'm dreading to say this. I'm absolutely dreading to say this to you as an audience. Audits are going to cost more. They're going to cost more to do. Like when Mike, Colm, myself, John, and the entire technical team sat down and look at, okay, what do we need to put into the Accountants Resource Center? What do we need to put into financial reporting? What do we need to do for audits? The work is significant to close off the gap. So it's going to be slower work. It's going to be extra work. And now we're in an environment where fees are dropping. So quality control, efficiency, your procedures are just, they're absolutely critical here because auditing, unfortunately, is going to be more difficult for the next 12 to 18 months than ever before. And it's really interesting. So I know we've got a mixed audience today. Some of you are coming from Ireland, some are coming from the UK. I was speaking to an auditor in the UK yesterday, and the way they described it is they said, well, you know, when the recession came after 9/11 and the dot-com bubble burst in 2001, there was a little bit of an impact, but it wasn't really a recession. And even in the UK in 2008 and 9, yeah, there was an impact, but it wasn't a deep recession. In Ireland, the recession was deeper, was more critical. And I think we're heading for an Ireland 2008, 9, 10, 11 type scenario from an auditing perspective as this recovers. So this auditing is not going to be challenging just for the next week, for the next month. Auditing is going to be challenging for the next 2 or 3 years. And ethical issues.
Yeah, like you really just kind of maybe to flag it, like the point you made at the start about, you know, potential fee dependency issues, about, you know, you have to issue your audit report to get paid. You know, you've touched on basically, you know, interim billing, but again, you just need to bear that in mind, watch out for that. And then really, to be honest, just, you know, it's the old nub, the provision of non-audit services, you know, your, you know, self-review threat regarding the flash statements and all the other services you're doing. But the management threat, you know, are you providing a management function to your own client because of COVID-19? Has this kicked in where you're doing more for your client, maybe stuff out of where you shouldn't be doing from an audit perspective, and how are you putting in your safeguards? I'm not saying you shouldn't be doing
the most important thing for me, Colm, on these two pieces is that in terms of the fee dependency issues, like, do you know what the biggest limitation in scope on an auditor is practically? The biggest limitation on scope on an auditor practically is not getting paid enough, or the threat of not getting paid. And again, we have seen this. We're having flashbacks to 2008, 9, and 10, and where problems arise for auditors. And I'm asking them, but you signed off those audit reports, and there was substantial outstanding fees. There was no agreement in place. So, you know, ethical standards are not black and white, but there's a real practical issue here. There's a real practical issue. And this is where our concern is coming from, people rushing to sign off the audit reports, because we need to raise the bill to get paid. We've got to eliminate those types of ethical threats. And I love what you're saying as well, Colm, in relation to non-audit services. There's a simple solution there. Make a distinction between audit and non-audit services. And if you're providing non-audit services, what you should be doing anyway to protect yourself is making that clear in the professional services agreement that you have in place, and making that clear in the professional service agreement that you are providing advisory services, but making sure that the decision-making and the management decisions always rest with management. Now more so than ever, I've been talking about this for 20 years, but now more so than ever, I know you want to jump in and help, and I know you want to jump in and solve problems, but we've got to box this stuff off to make sure, from an audit and even a non-audit perspective, that you don't end up in the role of management. And a quick question in relation to the Incorporated Law Society relaxing the 2-month reporting requirement. We've touched on this one, John. We've touched on this one earlier, because, you know, it's talk to your client, get your client to talk to their regulator. And there's no regulator in the country can force things through now. And just one more question, Katie, can't click into the links. Yeah, there was an issue with the links. I think what happens is when 700 or 800 people go click on our links at the very start of the webinar, the website crashed. But Katie, lots of people have accessed the links. So if you just go in and click in the chat box and access the links before we shut down here, you'll be able to get the handouts and get the material. Alternatively, Katie, it's all going to be in our free Facebook group for accountants, and it's going to be in our free section of the Knowledge Hub resources site. So just Colm, final comments. So we have audit issues. So the handouts here are audit issues, the ISIS and matters to be considered, events after probably going concern, and signing off audit opinions. They are the 4 handouts.
Yeah, probably the audit issues probably is a fairly decent, it's a fairly good starting point in terms of it. Now, it doesn't cover all the ISIS, because like you'd be there all day covering the ISIS, but in terms, it gives a whistle-stop tour about the big ticket ISIS from the point of view of planning, execution, and completion, and what you need to consider at an overall level in terms of, say, for example, ISIS 300 and 315. If you're finishing your audit, you might, as you said, Des, you might need to go back, revisit planning, update your risk assessments for COVID-19, and close it down. So it's these things that need to be addressed, documented on the file, so we aren't in a year's time going back and trying to reinvent the wheel on files that are going to be looked at for monitoring visits. Not that we'd ever do that.
Okay, so just in terms of folks, we're coming to the end of the week. Here's the webinars that we've run. Here's the webinars that we've run all of this week. We do have a 10 and 10 at the morning, where John and myself will come on at 10 o'clock in theory to answer 10 questions. But I don't think I've come on to any live stream webinar event this week where we only had 10 questions. The questions are more being counted in the hundreds. And I've said this to our Profit Pro members, to the firms we're working with. I've said this in the general population. Like, it's been hectic. It's going to be hectic. I know everybody's in a different situation depending on your circumstances, but the one thing that I do appeal to you, and we're seeing this happening, the one thing I do appeal to you is to look after yourselves, look after your team. And I really, really hope that you can take a break at the weekend and get a rest, because folks, this is not a sprint. We've come through the first wave, and get a rest, shut off, shut down, look after yourself, spend time with your family, spend time with your loved ones, spend time with your dog, your cat, over the weekend. And when we come back next weekend, we're going to do it all again. When we come back next Tuesday, we'll do it all again. But so we do have one more 10 at 10. Like our team are working to get as much as possible up and available and free for people to by the weekend. Obviously, we're working for our members. We're for those of you that are Accountants Resource Centre members, we're going to have templates out, and we know that we're going to be the first ones to the market to have detailed programs, to have the detailed financial statements, to have the disclosures. So look, it's all coming, but right now, let's hold off. If we have a client, there's nothing really needs to be signed today, tomorrow. Let's see where the guidance is. Let's see where it's falling. Let's see what's happening from a practical practice perspective. We will bring the information to you as soon as we have it, but it's about not panicking and keeping your head. Colm, I want to thank you very much for pulling the stuff together. I want to thank you for everything you're doing. I know we're going to get that stuff out to people as soon as possible. So thank you to Colm. Thank you to everybody who's joining us here online and via webinar, Facebook, LinkedIn. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope you found today's session beneficial. And until I see you again, stay safe and let's get it done.